Hello, and yes, a lady should be modest. Welcome to Best of the Rest, the show where we take a second look at movies that were poorly received upon release and challenge ourselves to only talk about the things we like and what the movie does well. And this week, we are talking the 2001 film Lara Croft Tomb Raider. My name is Chris Logan, and I am joined, as always, by Andrew Williams, podcast talker. You ready for this one, Andrew?
I am. It's been some time since I've gone back and watched this one, so I'm excited to dive back into it.
So you have seen it before then. Did you see this in theaters? Have you seen it a lot? What's your history with this movie?
I did not see it in theaters, I don't think. My mom actually really likes this movie. She was unavailable for comment as she is currently on a cruise with my dad.
We anxiously await her thoughts.
Yeah, so my mom really likes it, and of course my dad liked it too, for you can guess. It's so it was on a lot when I was a kid. Like, my mom really wanted it. I think she got them on DVD and he picked them up over the years. But yeah, I've seen it before. It's been around, but it's probably been a good 10 years since I've genuinely sat down and watched it. So this was the first time going back in a while.
Gotcha. I had never seen this movie before. I was obviously very aware of it. The marketing was huge. It was a pretty big hit. And Angelina Jolie as Lara Croft was a big deal. The Lara Croft character was red hot at the time. And this was a big budget adaptation. It had a lot of stuff going for it. I for whatever reason, didn't go see it in theaters and just never caught it any time after that until this week, preparing for this podcast. My first time watching this movie. And we're going to talk about it. Specifically, all the best parts, all the positives, what this movie does well, as is the premise of this very show. During the month of July, we are looking at poorly received video game adaptations, of which there's a few to choose from, Andrew. There's a bit of a video game curse, I've heard it called. These days, I think we've had a few video game movies that kind of break out of that mold, though. Do you think we're beyond the video game curse when movies like Sonic the Hedgehog, Detective Pikachu, whenever you hear that they're adapting a video game movie now, do you still assume it's going to be bad?
It kind of depends on what it is, because it's like anything. I think if you're adapting something that's got a built-in story, I'm not going to really question that. But, when they mentioned that they're making, this isn't a video game movie, but when they mentioned they were making a movie out of, say, Battleship, it was kind of like, what are we doing here exactly? I mean, so if they announced they were going to make a movie out of something fairly low level, simple like that, I'd probably question it. But overall, I don't know if we've gotten quite I don't know if we've gotten past I don't know what the term you'd use is.
It hasn't quite turned the corner like comic book movies.
Right.
Because superhero movies used to assume they weren't going to be very good, and now most of them are, by and large, which is a complete 180 from previous expectations. But yeah, I don't think video games are quite on that level just yet.
No, I don't think so. I think they've got. I think that's what I mean. They haven't quite gotten over the hump yet, as far as this is a bankable thing where it's going to be a pretty good outing. We're getting there. There's definitely been some more successful hits.
Despite video game movies having the reputation they do and critically most of the time not being well received, I have found that certain adaptations have this pocket of fandom, whether it's from nostalgia, growing up with them. They have their defenders, a lot of them. Our Discord community, whenever we announced the topic for this month, people were really jumping in there with movies that they are going to bat for. The Super Mario Bros. Movie came up a lot. People said that they genuinely like it. This comment here from a friend of the show, LazyCon, from back on our BVS episode, said, I honestly love the Super Mario Bros. Movie. Legitimately think it's a really good movie adaptation. That's high praise. And you know what? I maybe don't go to bat for it quite as strong, but I agree. We covered that last week, and that was a good time. Groffles hops in there and reiterates the praise for the Super Mario Bros. Movie. He says he used to own that VHS and loved it. And I think it's where a lot of those 90s adaptations love comes from. Or even the movie we're talking about today, 2001. I mean, millennial boys in particular, were probably the right age to find some enjoyment in this film. What do you think, Andrew?
I think that's about the most tactful way you could have put that.
Less tactful, they might have a timestamp slipped into the VHS slipcover.
Yeah, they might just stop it. It won't rewind it to a certain point every time. No, I think that's accurate. I think and it's not the same thing. Like we talked about Super Mario Brothers. That movie it's so weird, but it's also so unique, and it's just such a like I don't say weird is a bad thing, but like I was explaining it to somebody the other day, but like if you told me what a Super Mario Brothers movie was going to look like, or you asked me to describe what it would look like, my brain would never go to what the Super Mario Brothers movie looks like.
No.
That's never, I would never think of that. So it does create this unique experience that is easy enough to find a lot of enjoyment in. And I think a lot of these are very similar. Like even like stuff like Mortal Kombat, other stuff we may or may not be talking about in the coming weeks. I think you've got that right combination of things where these movies are making an impression and people are getting enjoyment out of them.
Well, today it's all about Lara Croft, Tomb Raider, released June 15th of 2001, made on a budget of $115 million. They went all in on this one. At the box office, it brings in $275 million. Critically, not well received at all, just a 20% on Rotten Tomatoes. I did check the audience score because we just established all these movies have their defenders. This movie got a sequel. I personally don't really know what the fan reception is from diehard fans of the video game series, but the audience score is just 47%. So there's not too many people out there trying to revise history on this one or go to bat for it, it seems.
But to be fair, it's still a little bit more mixed than the kind of decidedly negative critic response. You still got a pretty split audience there for the most, almost split 50-50, because that's how numbers work, Andrew. Good for you. It's definitely something that, like you said, it got a sequel. It made money. Reminds me a little bit of the Tim Story Fantastic Fours, where the first one comes out,
sure.
Doesn't make a huge impression necessarily, and nowadays is definitely not really looked back upon kindly, but still was successful and got itself a sequel. So
the movie had a bit of it wasn't quite stuck in developmental hell. I mean, it came out in 2001, just a few years after the video games really start taking off, so there's not this long production cycle, but they do go through a number of writers and creative teams before they land where they do. Officially, the version we get is written by the writing team of Patrick Massett and John Zinman. Now, as a duo, they also wrote the movie Gold in 2016, starring Matthew McConaughey, and that's like the only other high-profile movie to their name. They kind of work all over the place, a lot of TV stuff. They have some, probably most notably, credits on the TV show Friday Night Lights, which I know is a very popular TV show, but they're a bit here and there and not really popping up on the movie scene very often.
No, not really. They get the final script credit on this. There's a few other people with story credits, but yeah, it's interesting to look at. They're out there, but they're definitely like hiding in the weeds, kind of.
As you mentioned, there's some additional story credits. There's Sarah B. Cooper, Mike Werb, and Michael Collery. All because this movie went through many different drafts throughout its production cycle. It's really difficult to kind of parse out who contributed what at this point when it's all said and done, but obviously there was enough remaining from their scripts to get that story credit. It has been confirmed there was a script turned in by your dad's friend, Stephen E. D'Souza, wrote a script for this movie, but he doesn't get the story credit, doesn't get a writing credit, so it's safe to say it was wholly thrown out. But from the bits that we do know about it, it seemed like an interesting take, I'll say that.
Yeah, well, that's a nice way to put it. You pointed it out earlier. It's actually interesting. This movie comes out 5 years after like the first Tomb Raider game, which generally speaking probably has to be possibly the quickest turnaround from debut of an original game to film adaptation of said game. I know things like Uncharted sat for a long time trying to get a movie made, but yeah, I do find it interesting that Michael Werb and Michael Collery also co-wrote Face Off, which, the greatest movie of all time.
Love it.
And as well as a couple of other things like The Mask and Darkman 3, bunch of weird credits, but they also did some uncredited work on Tekken. So the Tekken film swinging back around into the video game territory. But yeah, a lot of different scripts. So it really is something where there's a lot of people sticking their hand in this. There's a lot of people, a lot of different scripts, a lot of things turned in. And like you said, in a relatively short amount of time. That's actually the part that's kind of blowing my mind now. And for some reason, I didn't really put the timeline together that you've really got a lot of work happening in a pretty short amount of time. So,
I mean, you're right. It is a short amount of time, but if you think about it, Super Mario Bros. Is kind of the same way. That movie came out in 93. I believe the first video game, the platformer anyway, came out in 87. So that's a 6-year turnaround.
It was 85.
The platformer? The NES Super Mario Bros?
Yes, 85.
Oh, 85. You are right.
So that's 8 years. So still pretty quick in the grand scheme. Longer than I would... Shorter than I would have thought, but yeah.
Speaking of Stephen E. D'Souza, we'll be talking about him quite a bit next week.
We shall indeed.
This movie
what does that mean, folks?
This movie is directed by Simon West, most notably the director of Con Air. Speaking of greatest action movies of all time starring Nicolas Cage, he would go on to direct movies like The Mechanic and The Expendables 2. It's a certain type of action movie, just based on those titles, right?
Right. You're getting a little bit of a B-level action feel there. I like Expendables 2 more than The Expendables. I might go as far as to say The Expendables 2 is the best of the trilogy. But Jean-Claude Van Damme kicks a knife into a dude's chest. That's awesome. I'm sorry. There's no... You can't come back from that. But he also notably, and I actually found that out reading about for this movie, directed the music video for Never Gonna Give You Up by Rick Astley. The video where he's dancing around all awkwardly.
Yes.
So... I'm just saying, Simon West might be the greatest director of all time, based off of what we're finding out today. But
he rickrolled the world.
Rickrolled the world, and I gotta wonder. I didn't even bother to look. I'm like, has that dude ever been interviewed about his part in this phenomenon? But
that's amazing.
But yeah, he's still out there. I mean, he's got a few credits every couple of years, but typically all direct to DVD type fare. Generally, so definitely playing in that kind of sandbox, and no shot against these movies, but if I'm not shocked that that's the style that a lot of them have. But
yeah, I mean, I don't think he's trying to win the Oscar for Best Picture when he directs a movie, right? I mean, I just don't think it's. I think what you see on screen is exactly what he's going for.
Yeah, not a lot of pretty straightforward. I don't want to say this because it sounds backhanded, but it's like meat and potatoes type presentation because he's not, there's not a lot of, not a whole lot of nuance, but for most of the stuff that he's doing here, it doesn't really require it either. So,
well, let's jump into it. Lara Croft, Tomb Raider. With her father presumed dead, adventurer Lara Croft has taken over his research into the world's most mysterious artifacts. When the nefarious Manfred Powell hires Laura's friendly rival, Alex West, to find the two halves of the powerful artifact called the Triangle, Lara must use clues left by her father to beat them to it and keep its power from falling into the wrong hands. That about sums it up, right, Andrew?
Yeah.
It's a race to the artifact. The artifact holds great power. Honestly, is there a genre for this, like, the official description of this movie calls her adventurer. That's where I get that from. But, like, that's not that's not a real thing. There's not people out there that like their job is to go be the first person to explore this long lost. That's it exists. I guess it comes from Indiana Jones. Maybe that's like the most popular version of it. But
I mean, but it's a fiction trope that goes back. I mean, you could go all the way back to our buddy Alan Quatermain, stuff like King Solomon's Mines,
or the Phantom
in fiction. The Phantom, like you're going back 100 years with this type of action adventure fiction. I mean, even you could argue stuff like the original Tarzan novels by Edgar Rice Burroughs kind of falls into similar kind of territory where he's just going on these wild, ridiculous adventures through these caves in Africa. And yeah, I don't. I mean, adventure. I mean, they call them adventure stories, but that sounds really broad. Like, everything is technically an adventure. Like me going to work every day is an adventure.
Broad, but it's describing this very specific thing where this lone person goes and discovers this ancient artifact, and there's that moment where it's like the legends are true and the curse happens, and then there's some supernatural stuff. Like there's like a template for this, and I guess it comes from classic literature and it's been reiterated upon in comic books and movies and video games with Tomb Raider and the Uncharted series. I mean, it's all kind of following that same blueprint.
That classic action adventure thing. I mean, that's the plot of The Phantom, by and large. Mysterious artifact, great power. That's literally the same plot.
Yeah.
But without the greatest actor of all time, Billy Zane, front and center. But yeah, it's from, it's like I said, it probably goes back 100 plus years at this point. Just the idea of, these characters going on these particularly niche defined adventures. It's like you said, it's always the same type of thing.
The hero they work solo, but the bad guy is always like a whole team with like modern technology, but the hero like slips in the back door of the caves and they get to it first.
Of course.
All right, well, let's talk about this adventure movie that we got. Before we jump into all the scenes, though, we are going to talk about the cast. And you know what we're going to do. We're going to start at the high point, the best casting, best performance of the film. Every week, we recognize one person who goes above and beyond the call of duty and elevates the quality of the entire movie with their performance. We recognize that person by giving them the Mark Strong Award. Andrew, kick us off. Who gets your Mark Strong Award for Lara Croft Tomb Raider?
I am, there's a couple of performances in this movie I liked, but I think I got to go to the top. I got to give it to Lara Croft herself. Angelina Jolie is getting my Mark Strong for her performance as Lara Croft. It's a big ask, what she's being asked to do in this movie, kind of carry this film as a female protagonist in a genre which to that point had not particularly gone to great strides to do things like that in a non-exploitative way. So, like I said, she's being tasked with a lot here, but I think she's up to that task. She gets into the thick of a lot of the action. Looks like she's doing a good amount of the stunts here herself. Like you can see close-ups of her making the dives, doing the jumps and stuff, and it's clearly her or very good editing or both. So I think she's got a big task here. I think she's up to it, and I think she genuinely is picking up this film and carrying it along sometimes with her own sheer willpower at times. But yeah, that's where I'm going.
Yeah, I gotta agree with that 100%. Look, Angelina Jolie also getting my Mark Strong Award for the titular character of Lara Croft. How could you not give it to her? I mean, like you said, there's other good performances in this movie, but she makes the movie. If you don't get that casting right, everything falls apart. Mm-hmm. And as you said, at times, it really is just her casting a performance that is kind of holding things together and pulling you along. I think she absolutely nails it. This character of Lara Croft, I mean, we can... let me acknowledge that maybe we aren't like... You and I, Andrew, certainly aren't the experts to talk about a female character's place in an action movie and how is she utilized and how much sexuality is too much sexuality. Like, I recognize that maybe it's not quite my place to say that, but I will say that I think it's handled well here. There were certainly times where the camera is lingering and is playing up her sexuality, but I think it's all in service to the character and who she is. there's not moments where she's getting victimized for her sexuality, where the bad guy has her in a compromising position or anything like that. It's always about being in control and being powerful. And Angelina Jolie went on record to being like, I want it to be like even sexier. I was trying to push the envelope even more than what you ended up getting on screen. So I think it was definitely from a place of empowerment. I think it all works. I think it comes together. I think at the end of the day, she's just cool as hell, which is the big appeal of the character from the video games. Like, there's this, again, in that world, a female protagonist in a world in video games that is dominated by male protagonists, but she's cool. She's handling her own. She's got these dual pistols. I think they translate all of the cool factor very well into the movie, and you gotta owe it all to Angelina Jolie for making that happen.
I agree. In short, I agree. It's like you said, I think she's in control of a lot of the decisions with the presentation of the character here. Like you said, we've heard from some of the other scripts that they were going to play up that sexuality factor a lot more. And the movie we end up getting has like, we talked about this before we started recording, but it has like one or two brief things for the most part, but by and large it avoids that. So as far as finding that balance, like I said, could you have taken it more one way or another? That's like I said, that's not for us to really decide finding that balance, but sure. I think she kind of drives it. And like you said, I agree that most of what's being done here is meant to kind of just be like, wow, Lara Croft is cool.
Ian Glenn plays our big bad guy, Manfred Powell. And while I wouldn't describe his performance necessarily as scenery chewing, it's not quite as over the top as some of the other villains we've seen in these types of roles. It is a very good bad guy performance. And Ian is the kind of person that you look at and you're like, immediately, yeah, that's the bad guy. Look at that slicked back black hair. Look at that face. Listen to the way he talks and that dialogue. That's the bad guy. He lives and breathes it. He almost doesn't have any choice but to play the bad guy with the way he comes across.
Yeah, he's playing a very particular type. Like you said, he's not going like full Treat Williams in the Phantom or anything like that, where he's just like, who straight up going nuts. Who could throws a spear at a guy? You can't just not anybody can just do that and make it work. But yeah, he's got the look. The minute you see him the first time, you know that this dude is the bad guy. There's no question. There's no indecision. But yeah, he's making the most of it. He's suitably, I don't know, diabolical is the word, but you can tell he's got himself in his mind first and foremost, always watching out for himself. And you're not shocked at all when his character ultimately decides to go into business for himself at the end.
There's someone that I didn't know was in this movie until I sat down and watched it, and his name came up in the opening credits. That is Daniel Craig. Plays Alex West, the other adventurer in this movie that is hired by Mr. Powell. And it's so funny to look, because he's a huge, you just said he's James Bond. He's a huge star now. And he's playing this pretty important but ultimately bit part in this movie. And in 2001, it's kind of where he was at. He's been in the game for a long time, all throughout the 90s, but really just a lot of smaller roles, working his kind of way up, and a lot of history with the man, Mark Strong. But here in 2001, we got a pre-James Bond Daniel Craig. You just can't, his James Bond and Benoit Blanc, those performances and that face is just so ingrained in my brain that you see him here in 2001, you're like, wow, he's a baby. Look how young he is. Look how skinny he is. But he's, of course, a grown-ass man already. But just compared to the, what we would come to know from the man, it is very jarring. But he's Daniel Craig. He's charming. He's funny.
Yep.
He's good-looking. He gets his own scenes of showing off sexuality. To balance things out, Andrew.
Right.
And they couldn't have picked a better guy to play that.
They could not have. He, like I said, he's kind of playing our kind of a Han Solo type character, the guy who kind of he kind of plays both sides, kind of the guy who the lead character kind of hates, but you can tell they kind of have a thing for each other. Kind of slotting into that in between, that kind of middle role, but ultimately, he's on the good guys. He's not going to work with, what's his face? Can't do that. That's not right. But yeah, he's Daniel Craig. I mean, this is like, and it's so weird because like even other stuff I've seen him in, like Layer Cake or Munich, those are still after this, and it's so weird to think that like he's just these things that exist in this weird before. Even Road to Perdition, which he's in, is after this. It's nuts to think about. So, but yeah, he's Daniel Craig. He's never not up to the task.
I mentioned Lara Croft's father in that synopsis, and in the movie, Richard Croft is played by Jon Voight. Now, Andrew, you're not going to believe this, but in real life, Jon Voight, Angelina Jolie's dad.
What?
What are the odds that would what is the massive coincidence that would happen?
That is insane. Chris, do you think they planned that?
No way.
There's
Hollywood
no way they
would
planned
never.
That. Like they would never. There's absolutely no way. We're so funny.
Nah. Is that a good bit? Is this funny? Let us know. Write in.
Let us know. VOTRcast@gmail.com.
And all seriousness, no. I think Jon Voight does a great job. I mean, he doesn't have a ton of screen time. It's mostly flashbacks and emotional stuff with his daughter. And I think he's bringing it, Andrew. You know what I mean by it? He's bringing the gravitas. He's bringing the seriousness. You buy in to this guy's history, that he knows his stuff, that he's a long-time adventurer, that he cares for his daughter. I'm buying all of it, buying everything that he's selling in this movie.
Yep, he is. He's putting in the work. And naturally, he's her dad. So obviously, I assume there's going to be some chemistry there, one way or another. Sure. But yeah, for whatever reason he's here, or if he was here, whatever. But it works. Like I said, you buy into that. He's this kind of aged adventurer, a bit of an older Alan Quartermain. You got to wonder if they should make a movie about that. That would probably be really cool. But yeah, he's bringing the gravitas. He's doing exactly what he needs to do.
Bringing the mustache.
That mustache.
What's funny is that, like, and we all know Jon Voight's her dad, but, like, they don't particularly look alike. You can't tell just by looking at him. So it's not like you could cast just about anybody that role and you'd be like, okay, sure, yeah, it's Angelina Jolie's dad, sure. But I've got to think in this case, even though Angelina Jolie was just now kind of blowing up, she had been in the industry for a while, but this was one of her first big breakout roles. Jon Voight was a much more established actor at the time. I think her casting comes first. I think they cast her, and they're like, hey, wouldn't it be fun if we got Jon Voight in here? But Andrew, I've got another one for you. I've always wondered this. The movie Armageddon stars Liv Tyler in one of her first big roles. And the soundtrack, we all know, the number one hit song, Don't Want to Miss a Thing, by Aerosmith, her dad, Steven Tyler. Which one of those came first? Or is that one genuinely a coincidence?
That one might actually be a coincidence. I'm not sure. I assume it is after
believing in coincidences. But
I understand that. Yes, I don't disagree with you on that. Coincidences rarely end up being coincidences. Chris, I have no idea where I'm going with this.
but you think Liv Tyler's going to like Michael Bay and like, look, my dad has this band.
I would think if it's anything, I would think it's the other way. I would think like they were like, hey, Aerosmith, and he was like, my daughter acts, right? But
hey, will you do the hit song from a new movie? And he's like, only if you cast my daughter. Fun fact, Andrew, I Don't Want to Miss a Thing is Aerosmith's only number one hit.
That is a fun fact.
Isn't that crazy? All those hits, none of them at number one.
God, what a bunch of chumps.
Bet you didn't think you'd learn that today during Lara Croft Tomb Raider podcast. Let's move on to the cast here. Noah Taylor plays Bryce. Use a James Bond reference. It's Lara Croft's Q. It's her tech guy. Her nerdy guy. He does machines, much like our friend Donatello. I mean, that's
He's the
a
guy in the
good
chair.
description of the role. The guy in the chair. There you go. That's a good way to put it. How many more analogies can we throw in here, Andrew?
I'm done. I got nothing else.
He's good. He plays the role well. You buy that he's nerdy and smart and trips over himself a bit. You know, he's kind of socially awkward, but he knows his stuff when it comes time to do what he does best.
Yeah, he's this guy, pretty notable character actor. I've seen him in, he's been in a bunch of stuff. I remember him from Life Aquatic with Steve Zissou. He was in a movie I like by Richard Ayoade called Submarine. He's also in Paddington 2, the greatest movie of all time. But yeah, he's, like I said, here he's the guy in the chair. I'm shrugging at the camera, folks. I got nothing else to say.
And finally, Chris Berry plays Hillary, who is you could say, I guess, butler or servant of the house to the Croft family. And I love this role, this performance. I really like what they're doing here during the scenes of the house, because it's obvious that, Lara Croft, the woman, is the head of the house. Her servants and assistants are men, and clearly she's like the toughest out of all of them. They're very clearly going for like the subversion of typical tropes and expectations, and I think it all works fantastically, because it's not like the character of Hillary is like offended or emasculated whenever Lara Croft kicks ass. They're all very supportive of each other, and I think it's a very fun dynamic.
I agree. Chris Berry is he's great. He was on Red Dwarf for as long as Red Dwarf has been on. And yeah, I really like the way they play that dynamic. You've kind of got Bryce is kind of the tech guy trying to do all the, everything that you would expect that, the guy in the chair to do. But you've got Hillary kind of acting as this, not really a father figure. They more seem to view each other more as peers. But you can tell there's still a little bit of a protector type vibe from him, where he wants to make sure that Laura's not getting herself into too much danger. But yeah, I do like there's a scene where like he's getting prepared to like join in the fight, and he's just taking all this time to still like immaculately prepare himself before he goes out. I just thought that was a bunch of fun little layers to add to the character.
And that about does it for the main cast. I mean, there's a few more bit players, but all in all, considering this as like a globe-trotting adventure movie, they keep it pretty tight with the scope on important characters to keep track of.
They do.
With that being said, it's time to jump into the movie itself, Andrew, starting with the best scene of the film, or at least our favorite. Go ahead and kick us off, Andrew. When is this movie firing on all cylinders? What is your favorite scene of Lara Croft Tomb Raider? It's weird that the movie's called Lara Croft Tomb Raider. Is that weird? That's weird, right? The video games are all called Tomb Raider, at least up until this point. I think there was 3 mainline games that come out. It's Tomb Raider, Tomb Raider 2, Tomb Raider 3. But like the character of Lara Croft was almost like a thing unto itself, like its own phenomenon separate from like the games. I personally never owned any Tomb Raider games. I had maybe played a friend's copy here or there. But, like, I knew who Lara Croft was. She was, like, on cover of magazines, even that first PS1 model of her. But I feel like they're just, maybe, were they trying to cash in on that when they did the movie? Like, Lara Croft Tomb Raider?
I don't know. That's actually a really good question, because it's one of those things where it's like, you know who she is. You know who this character is. And, like, to kind of have it be like weirdly done in such a way to like highlight the character's name first and then the title. If anything, you would have thought it would be the other way. Like Tomb Raider, Lara Croft. Like lead with Tomb Raider, because that's the franchise. But I don't know. I wasn't a huge guy. I didn't play the games either. I didn't have a PlayStation at the time. I had an N64. So but yeah, it definitely makes for an awkward title. Hashtag PP.
But hey, what's your favorite scene in Lara Croft Tomb Raider?
I am going with the sequence of events that leads to the acquisition of the first half of this triangle they're looking for. It is what's that triangle called again, Chris? Something of light.
The three-pointy.
The tri-pointy. Oh, there it is. Yes, the tri-pointy. Yes. The triangle of light. There it is. I had one of the words already. But this is a really kind of fun sequence, because to this point, Laura has found this key that her father has seemingly kind of entrusted to her to find this triangle of light, because this triangle of light will essentially allow somebody to control time. And that's bad, folks. So at this temple, we get a bunch of really cool action set pieces. We start off with kind of Laura. They're talking about sneaking into the cave, like behind the bad guys,
Right.
and just appearing at the right time. That's exactly what happens here. The bad guys are about to do the wrong thing and kind of mess this whole thing up, which I don't know why you stopped them. But if you didn't want them to find this thing, perfect. But,
Hashtag PP Andrew.
Hashtag PP. There's no movie in that case, Andrew. Don't be daft. But it's so she stops them. She inserts the key into the right place. This reveals a complicated action set piece involving like a beam moving back and forth that has to pierce the Buddha, I think it was. But either way, you get a lot of really cool big action set pieces here, and it ultimately leads to them having to fight off this giant army of ancient statues, including a giant one with 6 arms that ends up wielding like 4 swords, which is just awesome. This was like, I was like, oh man, here we go. This is sweet. So you get the heist type stuff, you get some big fun action set pieces, you get a big old blowout fight with some ancient statues, and to me, if the movie's kind of encapsulating all the things that I would associate with Tomb Raider, it's all right there.
Yeah, I gotta agree with that point. I mean, at some point, I'm looking at my notes here, and my note just says, "Oh, we full video game now." And I think this is, it's the right after that says secret key, giant swinging stuff. So yeah, it's definitely during the scene, because like you've got to insert the key at the exact right time. It's got to be the right keyhole, not the false keyhole. And then that giant swinging beam that she has to climb on top of, and there's even a boss fight at the end of this with that statue coming alive. Like this is a video game sequence put on film, and I mean that in a positive way, because it is a lot of fun. And a lot of times when they adapt video games, they are scared to do this, and so I think it's interesting that they had like the bravery, shall we call it, to just do like, this is what people like in the video game, these over the top set pieces. Let's put that in the movie, as absurd as it might be. One of my favorite video game franchises is Resident Evil, and they keep trying to adapt this into movies and TV shows, but they always, like the Mila Jovovich movies turn it into like very action heavy movies and over the top, and not a lot of like the lore from the video games. Because when you play the game, most of the gameplay is like puzzle solving and moving statues and putting gems in the right place. Just do that. Just make a movie and just do that. Just show that. Make that the movie. That's what this movie is doing. And in this scene, at least, it is working for me as well. It is a very fun scene in the movie. I like the look. We get to see a few quote unquote tombs in this movie. And it looks like this is a promise, a compliment, a positive. It looks like a set on a big soundstage. Like, it looks like that kind of classic Hollywood thing. It looks like you look at it and you go like, man, they don't really do this much anymore. Old Man, Young Clouds, these days it would be like maybe a small set extended by CG or what have you. And that's not better or worse. It's just different. And seeing this, 2001, it's about the end of that era of just building a huge exterior set on a soundstage. And those walls are made out of like styrofoam and sprayed with a texture to look like stone. You know that, but it's, you know what, man? You
don't care.
It's movie magic, right?
Exactly.
I like it. I like that look. I kind of miss that look, and it was fun seeing that a few times in this movie.
I agree. It's you get a bunch of those here too, and you get some really like the final one. I'm sure we'll talk about that eventually. Has like some really particularly complex like
they built a whole machine
pieces on it. They built a whole machine that's a physical machine. There is CGI in this movie. There's a particular robot who shows up as CGI, but overall, a lot of these sets and a lot of this stuff, especially the sets and the kind of, we mentioned the swinging on the beam, like that's all practical. And I thought that was a really cool move to do that. Obviously, the budget on this movie is big, but it's not like insane. But especially with CG kind of being in the place it was at the time, it probably was more feasible to do it practically, and I'm glad they did. It adds this, like you said, it adds this weird feeling to it that's, like you said, not meant to be an insult, but comes off really well, and I like it.
Good pick for favorite scene, Andrew. I'm gonna go a different direction though. I picked a different action scene a little bit earlier in the movie. This actually takes place at Lara Croft's home, her mansion, which is just like the tombs, another iconic location from the video games. And it just so happens that, she has that very important piece that was left to her by her father. The bad guys find out about it and they're sending a SWAT team to break in and steal it. And when they break in, she's getting a workout in, Andrew. She's doing her very typical giant bouncy swing that we have all done in our living room. She's
Yeah,
got
of course.
these two elastic bands strapped to her harness where she can descend and ascend and flip and drop down to the ground like Tom Cruise in the first Mission Impossible. It's
My favorite pastime.
it's a great workout. Great way to stay in shape. But she's doing that as they break in her pajamas, I might add. And they break in, full SWAT style, all blacked out gear, and they all have guns. She just has this swing, but she takes them out one by one. It is 100% that suspension of disbelief, but it's all in service of a very fun, kinetic action scene. We talked a lot about the type of action movies that Simon West likes to make. And this is the epitome of that as far as this movie goes. I was making those jokes about that being a great way to work out. Honestly, the reason she's in that swing is because it's necessary to have this fun action scene. And we know that. Yep. They're not trying to pull one over on us. Just enjoy the action scene. Enjoy the fact that she can unstrap one of them and strap it to another guy, send him flying, and hit some other of the commandos that have propelled down, and they get taken out. And then she uses her one remaining strap to run along the wall and dodge bullets. I mean, it's awesome. And you got the very 2001 soundtrack playing. It's very obvious this movie came out just a few short years after The Matrix. They have that, what I'm just going to call the Matrix style score to this movie. A lot of club music and techno and, early 2000s, baby. It's on full display here. But this scene, it's great. It's over the top. It lasts a pretty long time. You got the fun bouncy scenes. And then eventually she sneaks away. She descends down to a garage. And then we got a big chase scene on a motorcycle. She does a front wheelie on the motorcycle, then spins the tail to slap a guy in the face with the back tire. Awesome. I could have seen that in Mission Impossible 2. that would have fit right in there with that John Woo action. But it's just a very fun scene. Very wild, very, suspension of disbelief, all that good stuff. But I don't mean it ain't entertaining.
Yeah, but this is a great pick. This was another scene definitely grabbed my attention. Just like you said, you're like, why is she doing this? First off, it's her house. She's clearly rich. Why not? I don't need. I would if I had. I know I would do something dumb like that if I had the resources. But it's a fun sequence that kind of gives way into a really good set of action set pieces as these guys try to steal this key from her house. They ultimately succeed, but like I said, this is that scene where everybody kind of gets in on the action. You got the guy in the chair kind of guiding Laura as she kind of makes these makeshift weapons to take these guys out. You've also got, like I said, this is where Hillary kind of has his shotgun and he's putting on his bulletproof vest like over his pajamas and bathrobe and slipping on his nice shoes, stepping outside and getting part of the action. Yeah, so it's not just a fun action sequence in that regard. It also kind of expands on the relationship between these three, which is just a fun thing for the plot. And fantastic pick.
I mean, she is definitely rich. There's the scene where something that sets off the events of this movie is there is all the planets are going to be aligned. And I think they say all 9 planets, which I guess 2001 we still had 9 planets. And she sees this herself by looking through a comically large telescope. It's like the size of a room, and it gets smaller and smaller and smaller until it's, right up to her eye, where you just look through like a normal size eyepiece. But yeah, she just has this observatory in her mansion. Why not?
Again, why wouldn't you? But yeah, it's genuinely like comically sized. Like, yeah. But yeah, just I guess the joys of having a giant mansion with space to spare.
The movie opens with a little action set piece. She is inside what looks to be some sort of tomb. Immediately, first time watching the movie, and you see her in this almost looks like Egyptian type tomb. And I'm thinking The Mummy with Brendan Fraser, which again came out just a few short years before this. I'm like, okay, I'm kind of getting mummy vibes, artifact, old dusty stuff. Trap doors and switches. And then, like, this pillar explodes, and a metal CGI robot starts attacking her. And I'm like, oh, this is not. This is different. This is not The Mummy. This is a different feel altogether.
This is not Raiders of the Lost Ark.
And I'm not attacking it for being CG. For some of the stuff they have it do, it has to be. And I think there is a practical version as well, because it kind of goes back and forth depending on the shot that they need. But she's in a tomb, but fighting a very modern robot. But we get a lot of good shots of Lara Croft. We see that it is. I mean, they nailed this look, from the long braid to the short shorts, but her holsters that hold her guns go below the shorts. I mean, it is like to a T. They even enhanced Angelina Jolie's chest a little bit to try to better match the video game. And
oh my god,
what you think of that is whatever. But they went all out to get that look down, and that was definitely my first thought, kind of just seeing her in action. Even there's a lot of scenes where like a few strands of hair hang down one of her eyes. I mean, just right out of the video game. And you gotta appreciate that. I'm not a expert of the lore of the video game. I don't know how many liberties they're taking, but I can at the very least say they're getting the look down verbatim, and that is kind of rare in these types of adaptations.
Yeah. It's nice to see.
And just as I'm thinking, oh wow, female protagonist, they're letting her kick butt, and she's got these men that are servants that she's in charge of. We go right to a shower scene.
Yep. Which
I hashtag PP, but I'm kind of thinking like, okay, what is the message being sent here? I mean, and there's a few lingering shots in the shower. They're sort of getting out of the shower. Andrew, this movie has a bit of side boob in it. They're really pushing the PG-13.
What?
But you know what, Andrew? Later in the movie, I alluded to earlier, we get another shower scene, and it's Daniel Craig in the shower. And we get all the same lingering shots. We even get, like, the Austin Powers style of him getting out of the shower, and there's various objects that are blocking his midsection.
In the way, yeah.
Yeah, exactly. So does objectifying the men as well as the women even out or make it better? I think at the end of the day, it's not that deep. It's a sexy character. It's fun.
Yep.
Everyone is kind of on the same page. It's not exploitative. It kind of is exploitative, but it's not. I don't feel like it's problematic. It is very much of the times of the early 2000s. I think it works. I think it's what I'm trying to say without sounding like I'm horny on Maine or anything.
Yeah, no, no, I think I get the point. Because it's like you said, it's a hard line to follow. Because I mean, it's because I think when you really boil it down, and I really hope this isn't a wrong thing to say, like Lara Croft is a sexualized character. I think that is inherent. It's part of the character, and I think the movie really does try to find that balance of bringing that in, but not trying to make it the driving force of the character. Because this is something that 10 years prior could have gone very wrong. Like if the proper attention was not given, it could have been a lot more exploitative. It could have been a lot more stereotypical. It could have been a lot more demeaning in its presentation. Whereas here, I think they're really trying to still bring some of that in without having it be the driving force. And like we've said, Jolie herself has said that she kind of hoped, she thinks in hindsight that there should have been a little bit more of that. And as you read production notes on this movie, apparently a lot of other stuff in previous drafts was written, and some of it was even filmed But a lot of it ends up on the cutting room floor for a variety of reasons. But I think flipping it too and kind of giving Daniel Craig that same treatment, if not even a little bit more so, honestly. I think that's, these are attractive people. Make use of it.
Yeah, I think it's more about owning your sexuality and being confident, and that's definitely how she comes across. And there's that dialogue, I use it for the opening of the episode, where Hillary says, because she gets out of the shower, she walks across the room naked, and Hillary's like, a lady should be modest, and she repeats it back, much more sultry than I did, but just says, yes, a lady should be modest. Like, I'm not a lady, I'm Lara Croft. I'm a force of nature, is kind of what she's saying with that. She's owning her sexuality, her strength, her abilities, her intelligence, all of it. It's a complete package. You can't have one without the other. And I think ultimately that's how the message comes across. Again, I'm not the person to say that this is an empowering character to women. I don't know, but I can at least say I think that is the goal, and that's certainly how Angelina Jolie talks about it.
I agree. And even Simon West has spoken about it in similar regard. Simon West was actually kind of shocked this didn't lead to like a surgence of movies like this. He actually thought that it would, because it was successful and they wanted a sequel. He thought there would be this rush on similarly styled films, which, don't get me wrong, in that sort of situation, you probably would see a lot more exploitative type spin, carbon copies, what have you. But yeah, I think it's definitely about, like I said, it's not for us to say if the character's empowering. We're not the people that should be commenting on that. We're in fact the last people that should probably in the world be commenting on that. But I think the movie really does try to find that balance of just making it a part of the character without making it overpower the character.
Andrew, those statues that come alive in the tombs, did it remind you of any other movie? Curious if you might have been on the same wavelength here.
Did this remind you of the Power Rangers movie?
100%. Yes. Exactly what I thought of. Because they're like embedded in the wall, and then they start moving and they step out of the wall right out of the Power Rangers movie. Hey, it was fun there. It's fun here.
Yeah. I didn't think about that until like you literally like, you know what it reminds me of? And I was like, I just like my brain flashed back like, 30 or 25 years to whenever I was watching that and was like, yeah, it is.
Yes.
How have we not talked about that movie on this show? Coming soon, folks.
Coming soon. Well, we're gonna make that happen for sure. I like when she's fighting the boss fight, which is a giant statue, and she's just got like her twin pistols. And props to the movie here. She actually has to reload her guns. I think she's already unloaded like 50 rounds by then, but they do show her reload, and it's pretty cool. She's got like this backpack that shoots out clips, and she can just jam more clips into her guns. It's a pretty cool little device there.
Yep.
But, I mean, it's a stone statue. She's shooting it with guns. It's kind of funny. Like, that's not how it's going to come down.
Right.
But I like the little detail where like she shoots the face off of the statue because she's been shooting it so much that the head just spins and there's another face. Right. Does the statue see out of the eyeballs? Does it really need a face? I don't know, but it's a very fun visual to be like, second health bar.
Yep.
And then
again, another boss fight thing. Another very clear boss fight thing. But yeah, this is a fun fight. I thought that was a cool touch. That whole thing was just very creative. I thought it was some work being put in there.
We mentioned when we're going through the cast that Noah Taylor as Bryce, he's the man in the chair, but also a bit of comic relief. He kind of drops out for most of the movie once Laura starts kind of globe hopping and going on her adventures, but he does show up again towards the end, and there's this dialogue I decided to write down because they're on a helicopter, they're going to like the final location basically, and he just says, "My bum's gone to sleep again, all down the left cheek." And that's it. Didn't have to be in the movie, but I'm glad it was. But that does take us right up to this finale. This is where, the big showdown. We got our big bad guy, Powell. We got the Daniel Craig's character, Alex, that is there. That is, whose side is he on? We got Lara Croft showing up there, and it's the big showdown. And we get to kind of see how this thing works. This big machine starts up with the artifact, and it sucks Lara Croft inside, and there's a very touching moment where she gets to actually speak with her father through the power of the artifact because it controls time.
Yeah.
And she has sort of like a Diana in Wonder Woman 1984 moment where she's like, well, can't I use the power just for this one thing? Like, we were robbed of time together. Can I bring you back that? Just this one thing. And he's like, no, that you can't pick and choose how to abuse the power. You have to destroy this thing because that's how things happen and we can't change it. A very similar dilemma, like I said, to Wonder Woman 1984. And I think that scene works. It's pretty cool in the middle of this big action finale that it kind of stops everything to have that moment between the two of them. I do like, though, that once we get back into the action, the very end of this is a fist fight between her and Powell. A very grounded hand-to-hand combat. I like it for similar reasons that I had my favorite scene in Mission Impossible 2, where at the end, it wild over-the-top action movie ends in a fist fight between the good guy and the bad guy. It really stands out, punches that much harder. After seeing all the over-the-top stuff, to have just the good guy and bad guy just slugging it out. Every action movie should end that way. I want to see Iron Man just punching Thanos and him hitting him back and forth. Like, give me that.
Yeah, exactly. No, I agree. It's because at the end of the day, the big reveal in the finale is that Manfred Powell, whatever you want to call him, killed her father. So that suddenly makes this much more personal. And so she sees fit to handle that with her bare hands, which is awesome. Because, you killed her father, prepare to die. That's how it works. At least 2 movies have reinforced that if you kill somebody's father, you get killed for it. So this movie is no exception. But yeah, I do like that. Because, like I said, this is a very elaborate tomb that they're in. There's this weird machine that has these, like, arms with, like, these balls on the end of them that are, like, human-sized. Like swinging around it, you're never really sure what exactly this thing is supposed to do, but ultimately the key does fit onto it. But this whole thing's coming down, so she's having this fight like while this thing is collapsing around them, which makes it even cooler. But yeah, cool ending to the movie.
Speaking of cool ending, to escape this collapse, she can't just run out of the tomb. She can't just dive out as it's falling in. I don't know how else to say this. She dog skis, like instead of a dog sled, like there's these it's like an ice tunnel. She grabs onto the reins of these wolves and they take off running down the ice tunnel and she skis behind them and she's having a good time. She's like, woohoo! She goes down the slide and stuff. Again, didn't need to be there, but
no,
it is fun. I enjoyed it. It is a fun last little action beat there, and it really sums up the movie. It's just so over the top, and it's a movie based on an action video game. Like, of course, like it makes sense. Of course, it is. Like I again, I've said this a few times in this episode already. Like, I'm not the person to say if this is a great adaptation of the lore of Tomb Raider. But it definitely gets, like, the kinetic action of what makes these kinds of video games fun. It gets the character right. So even if it's not getting it 100% correct, again, I'm not the person to say that it is. It's what it is getting right. It's knocking it out of the park.
Yep, I agree. It when it comes together, it nails it.
Now, Andrew, you had mentioned you had seen this movie before, Lara Croft, Tomb Raider. Have you ever seen the sequel, Cradle of Life, I think it's called? Cradle of Light? Yes?
Also owned on DVD by my family.
Of course. How is it? Is it a step up, a step down? What's your mini review of it right now?
I see it as very much in the same vein. That one actually does have a Stephen E. D'Souza credit on it. Story credit. But I think it's very much like if this movie was the kind of thing that you enjoy, that movie is just a second helping of the same type of thing.
Maybe we will get around to it on a future episode, but it won't be this month. We are going to finish out Video Game Adaptation Month with back-to-back fighting game adaptations. Next week, it's going to be Street Fighter from 1994, followed by Mortal Kombat, the 1995 adaptation. I'm excited to talk about both of these movies for very different reasons, But I will not have any shortage of positive things to say about either of those movies, Andrew.
I don't think I will have no issues there.
But this week, it's time for Question of the Week. You can submit these in our Discord. There's a link in the show notes. If you haven't joined us already, what are you waiting for? It's free, it's fun. Jump in there and talk to us about movies and other nerdy stuff and ask questions. Like this one that comes from Chris Logan's wife is the username. This is, of course, a friend of the show, my wife. Thank you for asking this question. She says, in your own words, what's the difference between a timeline and an alternate universe? Oh boy.
Oh,
Andrew,
goodness.
you and I have had many conversations trying to like define, maybe not this exact question, but trying to define things. It's sort of an ongoing thing that we do. Like, what is a legacy sequel exactly versus a regular sequel? Does a character need to return from the first one, or does it be the same
How
universe?
long is the time period? Like, you have to wait.
When is it a reboot
years, like,
versus legacy sequel? Yeah.
Yeah.
Let's not go into that rabbit hole, but this one here is the difference between a timeline and alternate universe. So my mind is immediately going to the MCU. They're doing a lot of multiverse stuff now. They've done timeline stuff. And I kind of struggle with this. I'm not sure I can define it off the top of my head. Because we see in Endgame, we definitely see alternate timelines, right? They travel back in time. Spoilers for Avengers Endgame if you haven't seen it. But they travel back in time. They steal the Infinity Stones. And then the Ancient One explains to Hulk, well, you got to bring that stone back. Because if you don't bring that stone back, my timeline is going to be in chaos because we'll be left unprotected. So we have two separate branching timelines because he traveled back in time. But if he goes back, puts the stone back, everything stays the same. So to me, a timeline is like an event branches off into two different, well, universes, right? Wouldn't that, at the end of the day, be an alternate universe? But also you have things like we saw in Multiverse of Madness, where they travel to other universes and things are very different. We saw this in Loki as well. You know, there's the crocodile Loki or whatever. There's these different universes where characters look different and events happen differently. And they're much more extreme examples than just a branching path. I guess what I'm trying to say is, Andrew, I don't know. I guess what caused it? Like, an alternate universe is like, it's a different universe. It's always been a different universe. But a timeline means it used to be the same universe and it has split. I guess I'm going to land on that, Andrew. I don't know. Help me out here. What do you think?
I think you're on the right track, I think, with that statement. And the MCU has kind of been the fact that Loki was specifically talking about timelines and not alternate universes, I think made this discussion in regards to the MCU a lot more, I'll be nice and say complicated. Because you had them talking about alternate universes, but also like the sacred timeline. So the idea with like Avengers Endgame was that I don't know if it was necessarily saying that it was basically, rather, it was saying that if you bring the stone back to where you took it from, that timeline is never not protected. Therefore, it doesn't branch off into the timeline where it isn't protected. Or it doesn't branch off away from what the past already was. Because if you take that stone from the past and bring it to now, that timeline is going to go forward without it. Which is not how it unfolded. Because the way Avengers Endgame tries to have its cake and eat its stew with time travel is implying that if you go back and do something, it doesn't change anything because you exist in an alternate space. Essentially. I have no idea where I'm going with this, folks. So
yeah, but then how does the Captain America thing happen? If it puts you in a different path and then he ends up back in the man. I don't know.
So that's the thing. Captain America goes back and puts all the stones back, which prevents all of those branches from existing. Which the TVA, I feel like that gets a reference in Loki. They mentioned that like that was a special circumstance and like they knew that
it's the way it was always supposed to happen or something.
Yeah. But the way I was kind of understanding it is that there's a sacred timeline that is essentially a general happening of events. It is not exact. That is how you can have like 3 different people that are technically Spider-Man. Because the timeline, Uncle Ben gets shot, they get bit by the spider, they turn into Spider-Man. It's not saying that, like, if one day Peter goes and gets milk from 7-Eleven, he's creating a divergent timeline because in the other universe he went to the Shell station and got milk instead. Like, that's not really it. It's talking about, like, the grand strokes of the timeline. Certain events need to happen in certain ways. But at the same time, like, Toby's universe doesn't have the Avengers. He makes a whole joke about it. He has no idea who the Avengers are in Spider-Man No Way Home. Sorry. Some spoilers for Spider-Man No Way Home. So it's genuinely something that, like, the way I originally remember us talking about it, because our first big conversations about this were in the aftermath of Loki, before Spider-Man, before Doctor Strange, before any of that. And that was me being like, the events take place across universes, but it's the same timeline. So the timeline was referring to how events happen across universes. Like, the universes are different, and the details can be different, but the sequence of events was supposed to be a certain way. Spider-Man and Doctor Strange have complicated that understanding because that's clearly not the case. But also, the TVA doesn't exist anymore. It doesn't exist like it did. So, ultimately...
This is so confusing.
It's needlessly confusing. I have no idea where I'm going with this.
I will sit here and admit that I don't really understand Loki. And I'm sorry we're kind of turning this question into, like, MCU specific, but it's just such an easy example because they're dealing with this stuff. But, like, Loki, they're like, yeah, if anybody branches off the timeline, we zap them so there's not any major changes. But, like, how does the timeline get so off track that we get, like, alligator Loki without getting zapped before that happens? So the only explanation to that is there's alternate universes. But... again, what the hell's the difference between a timeline and a universe? I don't really know.
So if I were stripping away the MCU piece of it, I think it would be very simple. A timeline is just simply how the events unfold in a universe.
Okay.
And then an alternate universe is just an alternate universe. So, like, you look at, like, Time Cop. There's a timeline in Time Cop. And that's what's being manipulated, is a single timeline within a single universe. So, like, when I genuinely, like, envision what a timeline is, I would look at something like Back to the Future or Time Cop, where you are jumping back and forth to various events in a singular situation.
Okay, well, hang on. Let's look at Back to the Future since you brought that up. We see multiple futures, like the one where Biff is, he gets rich from the sports almanac, and then the way that the future eventually ends up, like the correct one, or the one, we end with. Are those two versions different timelines or different universes?
Those are different timelines because those are still taking place within the same universe, because Back to the Future is not subscribing to the path because Back to the Future subscribes to the idea that if you go back and change time, the timeline just unfolds differently. Like, it is not I know he implies that it's a branch, but it's a branch in the sense that there is a moment where the timeline diverges from what they knew. So it's not about getting rid of the alternate universe, it's about restoring it to what it was, and that's going back to the fracture point. But it's all within the same universe. Now, when you get into alternate universes, that's more like the Doctor Strange stuff, where it's like, okay, I'm jumping into a universe where there's an Illuminati made up of all these characters and there's no Avengers and that sort of thing. That's alternate universes. What's another good alternate universe example? I don't know.
Rick and Morty. They're traveling to alternate universes, right? Cronenberg universe and what have you. Look,
Bill and Ted, timelines.
If you have maybe a more elegant, simple explanation for this, I want to hear it. Please let us know. We are drowning in these words here. Hop into our Discord, like I said. Let us know there. Hit us up on Twitter if that's where you're at BOTRcast. Difference between a timeline and an alternate universe. Can you explain that in 240 characters or less? I would love to see someone try. And until then, just remember that maybe not every movie is great,
but all movies have greatness.
Thank you to Mark Benavides for singing our theme song. Follow him on Instagram at NotThatMarkAnthony. Thanks to Mitch for the music. Follow him on Twitter at MitchMakingMusic. And check our show notes for the SoundCloud link. If you enjoyed this episode, please share it with a friend. only way that we grow, and follow us on social media at BOTRcast. Thank you.